Welcome to Channel 24. Joining me now in the studio is political analyst and publicist Stanislav Belkovsky. Stanislav, welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Hello.
Stanislav, so I would like to start to begin with the top topic, I would say. Today is that Donald Trump is giving Putin 10 days to end the war in Ukraine. But he also admitted that he doubts this deadline will truly stop Putin, who clearly intends to keep fighting. And the US president is reportedly frustrated that the Russian dictator has ignored his message to the Kremlin. Because we've heard that Peskov was answering instead of Russian president. Why is Putin refusing to respond directly to the American president from your perspective?
Because Vladimir Putin doesn't want to quarrel with Donald Trump directly. He still pins his hopes on the future pact with American president, but just after the Ukraine is defeated, in Putin's opinion. Because now we can be quite sure that no pact between Russia and the United States could be reached before Putin uses his opportunity, as he perceives it, to submit Ukraine, to actually to reshape Ukraine and to create a Russian-dependent statehood on its base, which was the key goal of Putin's steadfast efforts for more than 20 years. For a number of years, he tried to resolve his problem with Ukraine by political methods, starting from 2004, when he supported Viktor Yanukovych as a pro-Russian candidate for Ukrainian president. Then when he became convinced that the political method couldn't be efficient in his hands, because Putin is not about soft power, he's not. Cannot deal really with the democracy and democratical mechanisms. And that's why his alliance with Viktor Medvedchuk is mainly based on their common and joint hatred to democracy and to Ukrainian identity as well, because Viktor Medvedchuk, remaining the key Putin's advisor on all Ukrainian matters, shares Putin's views that Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian statehood are fake ones, just to create a problem for Russia. And so Putin has shifted to military methods. First in 2014, when we observed the annexion of Crimea and start of the war in Donbass, and then this full-scale invasion in 2022. And now, in Putin's opinion, he has a unique chance to reach his military goals in Ukraine, maybe within a number of months or even years. But if he stops now, Putin thinks, he would never get this chance again. That's why he should put stop to his story with Ukraine and then get back to negotiations with the United States, hopeful that Trump could have no way out after the Ukrainian problem is resolved according to Putin's scenario. But Putin understands how emotional Trump is, how vulnerable Trump is to any personal words concerning him personally. That's why he's trying to avoid any direct sayings, any direct appeal to an American president, leaving in such ways some niches for negotiations on. We still don't know what decisions would be made in 10 days. Because secondary tariffs are quite understandable, but this version doesn't seem reliable enough. It doesn't seem real enough, because at the talks taken place in Stockholm a couple of days ago, China did not agree to conform to American proposals, to meet American proposals, and to refuse to buy Russian oil. And basing on the concept of energy sovereignty, China emphasized that he would not get rid of Russian oil. And now China is #1 consumer of Russian oil, 2.2 billion barrels per day out of 5 billion barrels per day exported by Russia now, 40% of consumption of Russian oil exports. And so maybe we could, of course, I have no facts, no leaks, but analyzing how Donald Trump has acted before, for instance, in the lead up of military attack on Iran, when he bluffed about 2 weeks given for Iran to rethink the problem, and in 3 days there were a strike on Iranian nuclear objects. Maybe there would be some asymmetric response, some unconventional solution concerning Russia, maybe in the field of security, because in everything security connected, Putin is much more sensitive and vulnerable as in the field of sanctions, tariffs, which he does not consider as a real long-term threat for Russia and himself.
But what if, Stanislav, nothing will happen in 10 days? What signal it will give to Moscow? It's not like, I'm not telling that they don't have any green light to attack Ukraine. Of course, they're attacking us all the time. But still, there is such a little chance that something will happen in 10 days. And then what?
No, if we mean that nothing, that Putin would not decide to stop the war in 10 days, we can be quite sure about it. Of course, Putin is not prepared to stop the war. Not in 10 days, not in 10 days, not in 100 days, before he obtains the results he expects. First and foremost, the official recognition of Russian jurisdiction over the next 5 annexed Ukrainian regions, and the power change in Kyiv, which, in Putin's opinion, has become much closer to in the past weeks and the past months, before of those tensions between Vladimir Zelensky and his Western partners over anti-corruption institutions over this conflict. And so Putin pins his hopes that this conflict could be used by him to topple the Ukrainian power, or at least to increase the chances to do it shortly. But when Trump announced 50 days pause, the potential meeting in Beijing was meant on the 3rd of September. As we know, the Chairman Xi invited Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin firmly supported this invitation to discuss all the situation between them and the contradictions in the triangle US, China, Russia, especially taking into consideration that, of course, Putin is interested in some kind of pact with the United States, but he cannot bet 100% on this pact, and he should imply all his obligations toward China and considers China as a very reliable and important ally as well. So no pact with the United States could be discussed, in Putin's opinion, without China and without Beijing's opinion on that. And he's not going to betray China for the sake of his pact with Trump. And that's why the three-lateral meeting has been, and remains as a concept so important for Putin. But there was no reason for Trump to shift this deadline from 50, 60 days from the 3rd of September to the 7th or 8th of August to do nothing thereafter, in my opinion. Something should happen, but we still don't know what would happen. The secondary tariffs don't seem viable enough, don't seem probable enough or efficient enough. Something it could be done, something unconventional, in my opinion, could be undertaken. But of course, I don't have any proof on that. It's just a logical speculation stemming from the analysis of psychotype and emotional type of Donald Trump's.
Yeah, I hear some ironic or jokes on social media that Donald Trump has taken a magic pill and somehow, shifted his direction, or just choose a bright side, a light side, a kind side of all the situation and Russian war in Ukraine. But yeah, of course, Stanislav, I have no personal doubts that Putin won't stop the war in Ukraine, whether it's going to be 10 days or 100 days. But why can the US president simply admit that he also doesn't have any magic stick or to force Putin to stop the war in Ukraine?
Yes, Trump hoped that, of course, having no magic stick, but having a really good relationship with Putin's, as we discussed it with you earlier, psychologically, Putin is more acceptable for Donald Trump than numerous democratic leaders. Because as Putin believes that only autocrats could be reliable partners on the international scene, so Trump believes such autocrats, which are not which have no democratic restrictions, no democratic institutions limiting them in their decisions and accomplishments of such decisions, could be really good counterparts. And here, Donald Trump respects autocrats like Putin, like Erdogan, like Chairman CEO of China, and so on, rather than democratic leaders. Separately, we should take into consideration the very complicated Trump's reflection toward Europe, because he doesn't like the majority of European leaders who, in his opinion, did not want him to become American president in 2016, to stay as American president in 2020, and to get back to American presidency in 2024. And the idea of revenge to everybody who was against him as American president is one of the key points of his agenda of his second term. We should realize it as a source of motivation in different Trump's moves and decisions. But at the same time, he promised to put stop to the war in Europe. He has just reached a trade agreement with European Union, which is widely considered very lucrative for America and very doubtful for Europe, which I can never agree. In my opinion, as it's lucrative for Europe as well if we realize that all those obligations to buy American natural resources for $750 billion are very far from reality, because America cannot supply Europe with such an amount of natural resources, or the promises of investment over $600 billion, because as it has been done before by countries of Persian Gulf, or even the Apple Corporation headed by Tim Cook, the promises of such investment could include the investments already made for the past 2 years. So it's all those conditions, and especially the readiness of European Union leaders to admit that Trump has won, is just a tool to manipulate Trump with all his enormous ambitions and his willingness to hear something about himself as a greatest of all times, as a GOAT, the most important political leader in the modern and world's history. But this agreement, so it was along with his trade agreement with Great Britain, with the UK, was a positive sign in the unfold of US relationship with Europe. And Europe's position, of course, toward Putin's Russia, toward Kremlin, is very, very hot and very harsh and very consecutive. Europe is preparing itself for the big war with Russia. And even if this war is not very realistic in the short term or mid-term period of time, it's becoming the basic idea, raison d'être, the life task of Europe now, of both Europe and NATO. And that's why Europe is still hopeful to get the United States as a key ally in counterbalancing Russia and in preparing itself for the war with Russia, regardless of Trump plans to reduce American military presence in Europe and so on. That's why Trump's opinion could be changing as well, especially because Trump is more and more understanding that Putin is not sincere with him about different aspects of Ukrainian war and of his readiness for real peace in Ukraine without meeting his primary goal, to take Ukraine over control by both military and political methods.
Yeah, so still to clarify, what gives Russia the confidence to ignore this Western threat? Like the trade with China, this political cover from Beijing, or something more?
It's everything besides about the great deal between Trump and China, and between the large contradictions between between the US and China, which is considered by Donald Trump as a key competitor of America and the main problem of the modern America, which, in my opinion, is to a very considerable extent true. This problem had been created by the America itself in the 1970s, when President Richard Nixon and his Secretary of State Henry Kissinger decided they needed China as a partner against the Soviet Union. And so they injected innumerable resources into China. First, since 1970s, then the new wave of those injections, those investment, and this friendship, American friendship with China was in 1990s under Bill Clinton's and his administration. Mm-hmm. And so now America is facing the results of its pro-China policies for several decades. But recognizing to Trump dignities and his really capable in some forecasts, Trump proclaimed this China as a source of threat and as a problem for America about 20 years ago. In his articles at the time, when he has not decided yet that he will be struggling for presidency and under the roof of which party he would run for presidency. At those times, he considered the Democratic parties as political basis rather than Republicans ones, and switched on to Republicans some later. But China as a threat was the Trump slogan for many years. Long before his first presidential term, and for his first running for presidency. And of course, he understands that the situation with the war in Europe could be an argument and could be one of the subjects of his negotiations with China, because China, of course, could impact Russia. China has some mechanism how to influence Russia and Putin and to push him toward ceasefire, at least. But at the same time, we should not exaggerate the ability to China to change Putin's mind. Putin is 100% obsessive about Ukraine. For him to submit Ukraine, to take over control on Ukraine, is a key goal, much more important than any others. And he's quite sure that Russia could withstand all the sanctions and his key resource, which he disposes much more than any of the modern political leaders of the world, is time. Putin is not in a hurry. He would stay as Russian president at least by 2036, and even more if he's healthy and active enough to stay in Kremlin thereafter. That's why Putin's informal hidden slogan is everybody dies but me. Everybody would go, and I'll still remain in power. Mm-hmm. So the time works for me, does Putin think, and so that's why resolving the Ukraine's problem first, all the rest thereafter. And that's why even China, with all its influence over the modern Russia and all the dependence of Russia on China now, cannot change this point of view dramatically.
But if there is still any chance that China will agree to pressure the Kremlin, what will it demand in return? You know, could be it like a result that we're going to pay such a high price for that so-called peace, which won't be a peace, I think.
No, China is really interested in long-term war in Europe. And this lukewarm war, not a nuclear war, of course, destroying Europe at all, because Europe is the largest market for China goods. And still the most important commercial partner for Beijing, of course. That's why China is a little bit irritated and annoyed by this new US-EU trade agreement, which has distanced China, at least from Europe. China pinned its hopes, and Chairman Xi talked to EU leaders not long ago that maybe under the conditions of conflict between the European Union and the United States, European Union could attract closer China as a trade and political and military partner, but it did not happen for European Union, regardless of the depth and intensity of their intercommunication with China, especially as in trade field. United States as a partner is still much more important, because the European Union considers itself still as a part of America-centered world. Psychologically, European Union cannot cut all the deep ties with America, regardless of who is American president and what Trump position on that, often considering European Union as a parasitic structure, could be. At the same time, China is, of course, very interested in mutually lucrative trade agreement with the United States. As I mentioned, it's interested in long-term the war in Europe, because this war in Europe increases Russia's dependence on China and allows China to purchase Russian oil and gas much cheaper than before. And for Russia, China has become the key player, mainly due to the war with Ukraine and to the senior partners. This dependence has grown several times for the past 3 years during the active phase of this war. But in trade and bargaining with the United States, China, of course, could offer something, some pressure on Russia to reach armistice, to reach ceasefire in Ukraine, if there would be some concessions from U.S. part, from Donald Trump's. And it should be the negotiation subject between Beijing and Washington, and Donald Trump realizes that quite clearly, quite bluntly. But nonetheless, I'm quite sure that regardless of any preconditions, regardless of any results, open or hidden, of negotiations between Washington and Beijing, Vladimir Putin would never agree to stop his war against Ukraine. Maybe he would even be prepared for any kind of ceasefires for several months. But his further attempts to take Ukraine under control, if not by military, but by political methods or in some combined way, is inevitable and unstoppable.
Every time I hear that, it's like a cold shower for me. So neither China nor India will agree possibly to give up Russian energy supplies if the US imposes secondary sanctions, right?
No, at least now, when having no concession from American side in some different parts, no, of course. And so China emphasized that at the talks in Stockholm with American Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent a couple of days ago. And I remember that Russia exports 5 billion, barrels of crude oil per day, and China buys 2.2, India 1.7. India has the diverse contradictory signals about his readiness to change the sources of crude oil. Some officials thought New Delhi is prepared for that, some officials not, and reminded us that Europe is still the big consumer of Russian energy, especially taking into consideration the oil products purchased through India, made up of Russian oil consumed by India. So that's why I don't consider the secondary tariff scenario too realistic. Of course, Trump could do it, but the consequences, especially for global markets, oil prices, which is of paramount importance, not just for America, but for Donald Trump policies, concentrated not just on petrol prices and gasoline prices in America, which every American administration is very dependent on, but the basic trends, including the development of artificial intelligence and cryptocurrencies, which require objectively the moderate price level for any energy. All this does not allow Trump to be too consecutive in instigating the oil market. And regardless of what Trump says himself about it, that he's not so anxious about oil prices. And he does firmly believe that America could compensate any shortages in oil market by itself. Of course, he is not quite sincere in that. That's why I think between 7th and 9th of August, we can expect something unconventional, not directly connected with those secondary tariffs. But secondary tariffs are not ruled out as well, at least by now.
Stanislav, do you see any scenario where the Kremlin take Washington's warnings seriously at all under Putin's dictatorship?
Yes, I think so. If it's going about security field, security sphere, because for the past 2 years, some special services operations, first and foremost undertaken by Israel against Hezbollah and then Iran, and also undertaken by Ukrainian special services on the 1st of June, emphasized that the modern war brings the sufficient risks, not just for common people, but for leaders, decision makers on the war as well. And you can be touched by different modern weapons, even being 100% protected in your own opinion. So this modern war and the new modern technologies of the war could be very dangerous even for highly guarded leaders. Not in vain has Russia cancelled some events like Army 2025 exhibition in Patriot Park, close to Moscow. I'm very sorry. Or the parade in St. Petersburg, dedicated to the birthday of Russian military navy. So that's why, because they are really afraid. And if Trump makes Putin to feel very unstable about his own security, it could be a real argument by America, but not in the field of tariff, sanctions, and so on.
So economical problems won't change anything. More often I read from...
Problems could change something, of course, but Putin does not perceive it seriously now. He's quite sure that Russia's economy is stable enough to even to meet all those problems and new sanctions for the coming years. And the past 3 years has proved, at least for Vladimir Putin personally, but for many people as well in the world, including myself, that the key problems of sanctions regime is inability to keep this regime, to maintain this regime. So Russia has hundreds of ways to avoid it, to avoid the sanctions in reality through third countries, which have not joined the sanctions regime, and even through some corrupted circles and businesses in Europe and America as well. That's not which would prevent Vladimir Putin from continuing this dreadful war. Some unconventional decisions should be made, and maybe Donald Trump doesn't understand this, and we still don't know why he has changed this deadline from 50, 60 days to 10 days. What was the real reason, and what is the implied scenario, the information of which is still close to us?
Yeah, more often I hear from some experts economical experts, that the sanctions issue regarding Russia would happen 10 years ago or 20 years ago, that would probably stop them from war in Ukraine, but not now. What is your take on that? Because you're saying that it won't stop them, but at the same time, I'm reading IMF sees Russia's wartime economy slowing after 2 strong years after the full-scale invasion. So we should not react optimistic on such kind of news, right?
No, the basic sanction against Russia's economy could be the dramatic lowering of oil prices. And Donald Trump has understood it for ages. During his presidential campaign last year, he said that if the oil price would be $40 per barrel, so Putin would never start his war. It's true. It's 100% true. But the question is how to achieve it, how to do it. It's very much dependent on the Persian Gulf countries, and they are not prepared to such kind of oil price war against Russia. They are prepared for some inconsiderable decrease, for instance, $60 per barrel, which is painful for Russia as well, because Russia's budget has been for 2025 has been prepared on the basis of oil price 69.7, and now because of the discount of Russian oil, Russian Urals discount reaching $10, $20 to $10, $12 per barrel due to sanctions, and because of sanctions, because certainly the budget deficit is a real problem for Russia, but it can still be resolved for the coming, by the end of 2026. Russia it wouldn't be crucial for Russia's economy and Russia's financial, Russian state finances. Russia still has sources to compensate, to cover it. And Putin, of course, is hopeful to finish the war in Ukraine by the second half of 2026. He's hopeful to finish it within this year. But if we are talking not just of objective picture of Russia's economy, but of Putin's perception of it, as far as his perception is concerned, of course, he's not afraid of any problems with the economy, not afraid of sanctions. What he's really afraid of, and has been afraid since his childhood, which is important source of problems stemming deeply in his psychology, his security, of course, his personal security.
Yeah, personal security. What if under the sanctions, there Putin's elite circle, oligarch circle? You probably heard that Russian-born oil tycoon Yevgen Shvidler has lost his legal challenge at the UK Supreme Court to overturn sanctions imposed on him by the British government in 2022, and now his assets remain frozen, and he has ties to Roman Abramovich. What signal it gives to the world that to be connected to Putin or people close to Putin can be very painful, or there is no.
It's been painful. It's been painful for many Russian tycoons for the past 3 years, and for several tycoons, especially personally tied to Putin for the past 11 years since Crimea annexion. But it hasn't impacted Kremlin's position dramatically toward the questions of war and peace, because Putin cannot be impacted in such questions. And Russian oligarchs, though being still influential in different questions and fields, cannot influence him with regard to Ukraine and the destiny of Ukraine. And mentioned Yevgen Shvidler as American citizen, by the way, who's never been Russia's citizen. He's been Soviet citizens and emigrated to the United States, become American citizen. And he's not a first-rank tycoon close to Putin. Through Roman Abramovich, he's connected to Kremlin, of course. And Roman Abramovich is a person who's taken a very important part in bringing Putin to power in late 1990s. Of course, he's still close to Putin, but in my opinion, at least 70-80% of Russian tycoons were very deeply interested in ceasefire and putting stop to the war, and even prepared themselves, both psychologically and from business point of view, for such ceasefire and the pact between Trump and Putin this spring. And they were bitterly disappointed about the absence of this pact, and about this march of events proved unreal. But at the same time, they can do nothing about this war, which is to a very considerable extent Putin's personal war. I would emphasize again, as I've told many times, if Russia's president were another person, even more dim than Putin, more harsh than Putin, more consecutive autocrat, and enemy of democracies and Putin, but not Putin himself, the probability of the war with Ukraine could be much, much lower.
Yeah. And the final thing that dragged my attention, the news these days from our neighbors, Poland, that their Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, has stated that 32 people were detained in Poland for suspected cooperation with Russian and Belarusian intelligence. And they were doing some arsons, and they were destabilize Poland on purpose, of course. Why do you think Poland now? Is this something unique? Is Moscow somehow punishing them for supporting Ukrainians so strongly since 2022, or isn't that related to each other?
I don't think we see something dramatically new in it.
Yeah.
It's a hybrid world war launched by Kremlin in 2014. And Kremlin's prepared for this hybrid world war since 2007, when we heard this infamous Putin's Munich speech. Yeah, so 7 years of preparation, then the world hybrid war started. The world war, now we are talking a lot about the probability of the Third World War. Mm-hmm. But in my opinion, the Third World War is over for many years. It was a Cold War, which ended in 1989 on the remains of Berlin Wall. Now we are living under the conditions of the Fourth World War, of course, a specific war, not too similar to first and second ones of the 20th century, because it's a hybrid war. And it started with the annexion of Crimea in late February 2014. And during all this period, Russia has been very active in military and intelligence fields against the collective West and European countries, and even against its main ally, China, which now is widely being disclosed through different sources. So Putin is prepared for the world war and for many years of this war, and we should not underestimate it. This willingness, his readiness for war, and his understanding that the war itself is the source of his youth, the source of his new identity, the source of his understanding of his righteousness of his cause, and the explanation why he should stay as Russian ruler for many years by and before his death. The war is the source of his energy for him. That's why it's not so easy to get Vladimir Putin from the path of the war, even if he reaches his dim goals in Ukraine, it wouldn't mean the war is over. That's why I think Europe's preparation for any kind of future full-scale war with Russia is basing on the reliable understanding what Putin's psychology really is, what Putin's psychological priorities really is, taking into consideration that Putin is a personalistic regime, and Russia as a country, Russia as a statehood, is very deeply dependent on his own and personal psychological priorities.
But in that case, Russia needs a lot of allies to fight with Europe, or not?
The past 11 years of this hybrid war showed us that Putin was to a certain extent successful in creating the coalitions of supporters. Yeah. He has some relationship with China, which allows him to get to be sufficient in psychological field and to sell the oil. He's got sources of help and aid from Iran and North Korea. He controls Belarus, of course, unwillingly for Alexander Lukashenko, who wanted to balance between different key forces on the global scene. But after the August 2020, of course, there was no way out for Lukashenko but to submit himself to Putin 100%. He hates Putin, but has no way out now. So Putin is quite sure that he was played on contradictions between Western countries, between America and Europe, inside Europe, taking into consideration the European dissidents like Hungary and Slovakia, actually supporting Moscow and Kremlin in many ways and in many aspects. He's hopeful that some new elite groups would come to power in Europe. For instance, right-wing groups like Alternative for Germany or something like, who would change European policies, because he has time. He has time to wait. He has time to maintain the currently existing level of war for a couple of years, when the surrounding world could change in his favor. That's the way Putin thinks, and the past 11 years have given him many proofs, many reasons to think in such way. We should not underestimate it as well.
Unfortunately, that's completely true. Thank you, Stanislav, for your time, your opinion. We'll see what's going to happen in 10 days or even less from now.
Let's pin our greatest hopes on the best, but do not rule out the worst, misfortunately. Thank you so much for your invitation. See you soon.
See you soon.